Bill Gates just found himself in the most dangerous position of his entire career. A total of 53 members of Congress, including ranking members from 3 separate committees, have formally launched investigations into his dealings with Jeffrey Epstein. And this isn't some tabloid speculation or conspiracy theory nonsense. This is a coordinated congressional inquiry triggered by newly unsealed court documents that reveal meetings, financial transfers, and communications that contradict every public statement Gates has made about his relationship with the convicted sex offender. When bipartisan congressional leaders unite to demand answers from one of the world's most powerful billionaires, you know something absolutely explosive has just surfaced. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So what set off this unprecedented congressional action? Newly unsealed documents from the Epstein estate litigation reveal at least 37 documented meetings between Gates and Epstein from 2011 through 2014, a period when Epstein was already a registered sex offender. Sources reviewing the 200-page document release claim there were multiple visits to Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, private flights that don't appear in previously disclosed records, and financial arrangements involving offshore entities that raise serious questions about the nature of their relationship. This isn't just another news cycle about a billionaire's past mistakes. Members of Congress from both parties are now publicly demanding explanations for what these documents reveal, including specific transactions that legal experts say could trigger violations of federal disclosure laws and nonprofit governance requirements. And believe me, when the House Oversight Committee, Senate Finance Committee, and House Judiciary Committee all simultaneously launch inquiries, you know something massive has just detonated. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching elected officials from across the political spectrum unite in demanding accountability from someone who has spent decades carefully crafting an image as a global philanthropist and humanitarian. Here's the full picture of what's been unfolding. Questions about Gates's relationship with Epstein have simmered for years, fueled by investigative reports, divorce filings, and persistent rumors. But everything escalated according to court filings from January 12th when a federal judge in Manhattan ordered the release of previously sealed documents from the Epstein Victim Compensation Fund litigation. The documents, which include emails, flight logs, and financial records dated between 2011 and 2014, reportedly show a relationship far more extensive than Gates has ever publicly acknowledged. This wasn't about a few social dinners or professional fundraising meetings, which is how Gates previously characterized their interactions. It was about sustained contact involving private travel, offshore financial vehicles, and communications that suggest a level of closeness that directly contradicts Gates's public narrative. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where it really gets serious. When congressional staffers reviewed the unsealed documents in secure briefings on January 15th, they identified patterns that raised immediate red flags about potential violations of nonprofit disclosure requirements and tax law. And let's be honest for a moment, congressional investigations into billionaire philanthropists are extremely rare. They don't happen over minor accounting discrepancies or casual social relationships. They happen when lawmakers believe there may have been violations of federal law or systematic efforts to conceal material information from regulators and the public. Here's what multiple congressional sources say happened next. On January 17th, a bipartisan group of 53 Congress members held an emergency closed-door briefing after reviewing the unsealed documents and testimony from forensic accountants. The group included 29 Democrats and 24 Republicans. Sources told reporters that Representative James Comer, Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee, stated that the patterns of financial transactions through offshore entities during the period of documented contact with Epstein were deeply troubling and required immediate investigation. Meanwhile, Senator Ron Wyden, Democratic chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, called the discrepancies between Gates's public statements and the documentary evidence a matter requiring full transparency given the tax-exempt status of the Gates Foundation and its billions in assets. By the end of that 4-hour session, the group had drafted formal letters demanding complete disclosure of all financial dealings, travel records, and communications with Epstein and his associated entities. The letters released publicly on January 18th claim that the newly unsealed documents reveal a pattern that was never disclosed to foundation boards, regulatory authorities, or the public despite multiple opportunities to do so. Reporters who obtained the full text note the language is unusually direct and specific. The congressional letters cite 7 separate offshore wire transfers totaling approximately $2.3 million between entities connected to Epstein and accounts linked to Gates-controlled investment vehicles between May 2011 and October 2013. They reference flight logs showing at least 4 trips on Epstein's private aircraft during this period, and they point to email exchanges in which Gates and Epstein discussed potential investments and foundation initiatives in language that suggests a far closer working relationship than previously acknowledged. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now things get absolutely wild. When those documents were reviewed in congressional briefings, even Gates's longtime defenders in Washington couldn't explain the contradictions between his public statements and the documentary record. A Democratic congressman who had previously praised the Gates Foundation's global health work stood in the House chamber with visible frustration and read portions of the investigation demand himself. That's when it became clear this isn't just another celebrity scandal. The bombshell moment came when forensic accountants testified in the January 17th closed-door briefing about the structure of the offshore transactions. According to 3 sources present at the briefing, the accountants explained that the transfers were routed through shell companies in the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands using patterns typically associated with concealing the beneficial owners of financial arrangements. One Democratic senator who attended the briefing told reporters on Background that the level of complexity in these structures went far beyond what you would expect from routine investment activities. This testimony sent shockwaves through the Capitol. When forensic financial experts conclude that transaction patterns raise red flags about concealment, it signals one thing: there are serious questions that demand serious answers. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. And here's what several legal analysts say is particularly problematic. If Gates was engaged in substantive business discussions or financial arrangements with Epstein during this period, there are disclosure obligations that may apply given his role leading a major tax-exempt foundation. The Internal Revenue Code requires foundations to disclose transactions with disqualified persons and related parties. Multiple nonprofit law experts consulted by congressional investigators have stated that the transaction patterns revealed in the unsealed documents warrant immediate investigation to determine whether disclosure obligations were met. This puts Gates in a nearly impossible position. On one side, there's enormous pressure to maintain the reputation of the Gates Foundation, which has deployed billions in global health, education, and development initiatives. On the other side, there's now formal congressional scrutiny backed by subpoena power, forensic accountants, and lawmakers who have stated publicly that the documentary record demands full transparency. There's no easy path forward. Either provide complete disclosure and accept whatever consequences flow from that, or resist congressional demands and face accusations of stonewalling. And here's the tricky part: there's no credible middle ground. Either the relationship with Epstein was limited to a few dinners, as Gates has previously suggested, in which case the documentary evidence of 37 meetings, multiple flights, and millions in offshore transactions would be impossible to explain. Or the relationship was far more extensive, in which case every previous public statement minimizing the connection becomes a problem. Legal and political analysts are calling this a credibility crisis with potentially devastating consequences. A former federal prosecutor told news networks that if the documentary evidence contradicts sworn statements or formal disclosures made to regulatory authorities, there could be serious legal exposure beyond just reputational damage. A Columbia Law School professor specializing in nonprofit governance added that foundation trustees have fiduciary duties that include oversight of potential conflicts of interest and related party transactions. If Gates maintained undisclosed financial relationships with Epstein while serving in foundation leadership, it raises questions about whether other trustees were properly informed and whether governance protocols were followed. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. So let's break down what this could mean. First, the political impact is immediate and significant. There's now a formal bipartisan congressional investigation that includes 3 major committees with oversight jurisdiction. While these investigations don't automatically result in criminal charges, their symbolic weight is enormous. They signal that questions about Gates's relationship with Epstein are not going away and that powerful institutions are taking this seriously. Before this congressional action, many assumed that elite philanthropists were essentially beyond scrutiny as long as their foundations continued doing good work. That assumption is now being directly challenged. They also create a formal record that could be used in future civil litigation by Epstein victims seeking accountability from those who maintained relationships with him after his conviction. Legal experts note that congressional testimony and findings can become powerful evidence in subsequent civil cases, particularly when they establish patterns of behavior or undisclosed relationships. Second, it creates a massive problem for the Gates Foundation's reputation. Major philanthropic initiatives depend on credibility and trust. A Qualtrics poll conducted in late January found that 43% of Americans said their confidence in the Gates Foundation had decreased based on revelations about the extent of Gates's relationship with Epstein, with 62% saying they wanted complete transparency. That kind of reputational damage can directly impact the foundation's ability to attract partners and maintain public support. Finally, the broader implications for accountability in elite philanthropy are profound. This case will be watched closely as a test of whether disclosure requirements have real teeth or are essentially voluntary for the ultra-wealthy. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate fallout, this is really about fundamental questions of accountability in American society. The tax benefits provided to major foundations represent billions in foregone government revenue justified by the public benefit these organizations provide. That public benefit depends on trust, which in turn depends on transparency and high ethical standards. And here's what's particularly troubling to many observers. This comes at a time when public trust in elite institutions is already at historic lows. According to a Pew Research poll from December 2025, only 19% of Americans say they have high confidence that wealthy philanthropists operate with transparency and accountability. When one of the world's most prominent billionaires faces congressional scrutiny over concealed relationships with a convicted sex offender, it feeds directly into broader concerns about whether there's one set of rules for the powerful and another for everyone else. If foundation leaders can maintain undisclosed relationships with convicted criminals and structure financial transactions through offshore entities to avoid scrutiny, while ordinary Americans face aggressive enforcement for minor tax filing errors, the entire system of philanthropic tax benefits comes under a cloud. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. This scenario is causing significant concern within the philanthropic sector. Reports indicate that foundation trustees held emergency meetings in late January to discuss response strategies. Some argued for full cooperation with congressional investigators and proactive disclosure to get ahead of the story. Others expressed concern about setting a dangerous precedent that could expose confidential information. The organization is clearly struggling with how to respond to a crisis that goes to the heart of its founders' credibility. Meanwhile, Epstein victims and their advocates are watching closely and demanding that anyone who maintained relationships with Epstein after his conviction be held fully accountable. Victim advocacy groups have released statements calling for complete transparency from Gates and all other individuals named in the unsealed documents. They argue that the pain and trauma suffered by Epstein's victims is compounded when powerful individuals who associated with him face no meaningful consequences and are allowed to minimize their connections without full accountability. To these advocates, this congressional investigation represents a long overdue reckoning with a system that has protected the wealthy and powerful while leaving victims seeking justice. Things escalated further when Gates released a statement through his representatives on January 20th. The statement acknowledged meetings with Epstein but characterized them as related to philanthropy discussions. It claimed that Gates regretted the association in hindsight, but insisted there was nothing inappropriate about the contacts. It did not address the offshore financial transactions, the discrepancies with travel records, or the emails suggesting a closer working relationship. Legal experts immediately flagged multiple problems with this response. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you view the situation. Here's what makes it even more problematic. The statement's carefully worded language essentially confirmed there's more to the story. Instead of providing the full transparency congressional investigators demanded, the response was lawyered language that acknowledged some meetings while avoiding specifics about the financial arrangements. When your response to a congressional investigation is a carefully parsed statement that doesn't address the most serious allegations, you've already signaled there are facts you're not prepared to disclose. A former assistant U.S. attorney told reporters that the decision not to address the offshore transaction questions suggests those transactions are either impossible to explain in a way consistent with previous disclosures, or they involve arrangements that Gates's legal team believes are problematic. This goes far beyond a single billionaire's reputation. It's about whether transparency requirements apply equally to everyone, or whether sufficient wealth creates a shield against scrutiny. If there are no consequences for maintaining undisclosed relationships and financial arrangements with a convicted sex offender while running a major tax-exempt foundation, it signals the rules are different for the ultra-wealthy. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's the situation we're facing. A bipartisan group of 53 members of Congress has launched formal investigations after reviewing documents that reveal 37 documented meetings, offshore transactions totaling millions, and communications that contradict previous public statements. This is no longer speculation. It's about whether one of the world's most powerful individuals provided complete disclosure about relationships that legal experts say may trigger federal reporting requirements. When forensic accountants testify about transaction patterns that raise red flags and committee chairmen from both parties demand transparency, we've entered unprecedented territory for elite American philanthropy. Keep a close eye on this story. Congressional investigators are reportedly preparing subpoenas for additional documents and testimony. The IRS and Justice Department are reviewing whether the information warrants formal inquiries, and victim advocacy groups are considering whether the unsealed documents provide grounds for additional civil litigation. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here's where things stand right now. 53 elected officials have put their oversight authority behind a demand for full transparency from one of the world's most prominent philanthropists. Forensic accountants have testified about transaction patterns that raise serious questions. And the documentary record directly contradicts years of public statements. This isn't just another news cycle. This is a test case for whether accountability applies to everyone or whether elite philanthropy operates beyond meaningful scrutiny. What happens next could determine whether disclosure requirements for tax-exempt foundations have any real meaning at all. The evidence is in sealed court documents now being reviewed by congressional investigators with subpoena power. The questions have been formally raised by bipartisan committees. Now we wait to see whether Bill Gates provides the complete transparency that victims, advocates, and lawmakers are demanding, or whether this becomes another example of the powerful avoiding accountability through legal maneuvering and PR spin. The stakes have never been higher for the credibility of elite philanthropy in America. The contradictions have never been more glaring, and the demand for answers has never been backed by more formal investigative authority. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage.